Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Blame It On Marketing. We have some repeat guests, including Will Aitken on today, but I will let Will and Tyler introduce himself in a hot second. We want to be talking about brands, and especially B2B brands, that were built off the back of B2B influencers, and what are the pros and the cons and the risks and how that's going as an industry and tactic in general. So I'm going to throw it over to Tyler first to introduce himself since he hasn't been on the podcast before, and then Will.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much. It is so exciting to be here for my first time, but I can't wait for my second time soon. Tyler Lessard. I have been VP Marketing at Vidyard for the last 10 years. I was so successful in building up a marketing program based on influencers that I have recently left to go off and do my own consulting training and workshops around building media brands, building influencer marketing strategies, and others. So really excited to be here. And as part of my life at Vidyard, I also launched the Sales Feed Media Network. Little sign up here behind me. I'd light it up, but it would freak you all out right now because it goes like crazy. And I'll talk a little bit about that and how we used influencers to really build up our media brand extension. So great to be here.
And I'm Will. I used to work for Tyler at Sales Feed, and I guess I am an influencer in the B2B sales and sometimes the marketing space as well.
Awesome. Well, welcome back, Will, and welcome for your first time, Tyler. As you alluded to, Tyler, the influencer marketing world has absolutely boomed, so much so that you've quit your job and you're now doing that full-time for yourself, which is awesome to hear. So it's obviously going well. And we've seen loads of companies do this, haven't we? Especially over the last couple of years. Lots of people have started to kind of utilize, I'm not going to say use, influencers to build their brand and to start selling. So, and we've seen really successful companies do that. So it's like Lavender AI, Will, your friends over at Lavender, Sales Loft, Vidyard, obviously Tyler, you guys have all done it. Is there like a particular reason why things have kind of gone that way, do you think? Why businesses have started to build their businesses around influencers?
So I can start and toss out a few things that I've seen in the market. So as a marketing leader, I spend a lot of time looking at and thinking about and researching a few different angles on the market. One is like, how is our audience? How are potential buyers, potential prospects researching, engaging, learning, generating awareness, all those sorts of things. And, that's one big part of it. And on the other side, there's also been an interesting thing happening with sort of the world of influencers and how that's grown based on the social media networks. So I've seen these sort of two big pillars grow. One is, again, for the audience, just those habits have continued to change over time, right? Like 10 years ago, we put a lot of money in ads because people actually interacted with digital ads online. And then, of course, all sorts of things happen and people don't give a shit about ads anymore. They ignore them, they push them away. They're looking less and less at their inboxes, right? Email marketing doesn't have the same effectiveness as it once did. And so those are all based on how the buyers or prospects or audiences have changed, not because of the way we want to do things, but because of the way they behave. And so more and more things have moved in some markets towards people, again, word of mouth, leveraging, again, recommendations from peers, from experts, and from other influencers. So that's been one big part of it, is just shift in potential buyer behavior. And then the other side has been this rise of influencers in different B2B spaces. And again, that's largely become a factor of the social media networks and how those have really enabled and helped B2B folks build their brands, both on LinkedIn, on YouTube, and on other channels. And again, I think it's sort of been a natural growth of that. So those two forces, for me, have come together in the last few years and have created an opportunity for brands to take advantage of it, to leverage it, and to use it as a way to build relationships with audiences. So that's kind of what I've seen happen. And Will, I'm not sure, as somebody both on the other side and somebody managing influencers, if you've seen sort of anything else happening.
Yeah, I think there has been a large rise in the number of influencers and just the way that audiences consume information. They want to look for people who they trust, who they see as authentic. They're looking more at people rather than brands. And obviously brands, by working with influencers, can leverage and borrow that trust for themselves as long as it's done right. there's a lot of people doing a lot more side gigging now, right? And working with brands is one way that a lot of people have been able to earn a side income alongside, or even entirely replace their income by becoming a full-time influencer. So there's entire careers being built off this as well.
Do you think anything specifically happened to push this into the B2B world? Because I'm like a 2010 makeup YouTube girly. Like, that is my happy space. That is what I know. And like, for those of you who are not this old, I remember when you didn't have to disclose advertisement and partnership. Like, that's how long ago this was. So was there anything like a pivotal point that influencers in B2B just need to get big enough? Did B2B need to get brave enough? Like, what's really pushed it to be like the last couple of years where we're seeing all these brands doing this? Well, I say all these, a few select brands doing this really, really well.
I think from what I've seen over the last, 15, honestly, 20 years, if I'm going to date myself in my world of marketing, is that some forms of influencer marketing have always been happening out there. The idea of it, the basic approach, isn't new, right? So you think about in the B2B space, for a long time, there have been partnerships and collaborations around content creation, right? And that largely revolved around finding experts in the community who could provide thought leadership to do joint content. And 10 years ago, that was all written content because that's all marketing teams were doing. So it was, ebooks and guides and blog posts where there was some kind of collaboration happening. And typically both parties would partner up to then share that into their respective communities. And those experts were considered influencers, but at the time we just didn't really call them that. It was just smart marketing, right? It was partnering with folks who have a strong voice in the space, who are trusted by the audience, and partnering with them to go to market. And I think over the years, part of what has shifted that into what we now think of as influencer relationships has been the fact that those personalities have become much more, like personal in the space. And the content we're creating is becoming much more human and person-centric. Again, it's no longer like ebooks and blog posts. Now it's like videos that we're doing together. And these personal brands are really becoming more resonant in the market. And so folks who have probably been influencers for a long time in B2B because they were writing content were never really considered influencers because people didn't know their face. They didn't know their voice. They were just thought of as thought leaders. But now that their personalities are coming out, now that they're building followings on social channels, because again, platforms like LinkedIn have been fostering that, we're seeing this sort of, rise of what we call influencers. And so I think it's just been a natural evolution of a lot of that smart marketing we've done to partner with thought leaders in our space. But now it's like we have this great opportunity to leverage them across so many different channels, to bring their personalities into what we do, and to be a lot more tactical in how we partner across all these different channels we have and with these different audiences. So that's kind of what I've seen. And it's been really interesting to see this happen for this sort of myriad of factors.
I would also like to maybe argue that, so the B2B thought leaders that we used to work with back in the day, it was more important that they were well versed in their topic and had the right experience rather than they had an audience for us to market into, which what I feel like is like the real big change. Like, we're now looking at follower numbers, engagement. That wasn't ever a thing. Like, my first job in marketing, I ran all the webinars, like weekly webinars, and I could just hit people up and that didn't matter. It mattered that they knew what they were talking about. Well, I'm not saying that current influencers don't know what they're talking about, but that was a very this shift feels like into like proper, like mainstream influence type marketing now.
I also think people have been doing this and using this strategy, just not in an influencer capacity for a while. Like you look at a lot of like big companies whose CEOs have grown a following, which as a result of growing their companies, they've almost been doing it themselves. They've become an influencer for their company to grow it, right? Their whole founder-led growth motion. It's just now that people are realizing, oh, hang on, if that works for the founder of a company, then can we borrow some of that audience, that trust, that credibility from influencers who have followers that we don't have. So
yeah, and I mean, it's been really interesting, to your point, to see these people who we would traditionally think of as thought leaders, or others who maybe weren't at the time, but this opportunity they've had to build these followings and these audiences that we can now tap into. Like, it's wild to think, even again, like 10 years ago, again, as somebody who was in the space, like podcasts were barely even a thing, right? Just like generally speaking, let alone in like B2B worlds and things like that. And so there has been this like great rise of like podcast channels. Again, really like YouTube channels have taken off. And, there's a lot of different dynamics that are contributing to that. There are, platforms like TikTok that did not exist when I started at Vidyard. And so it's been this like perfect storm of all of these different sort of different channels, these different modes, these different mediums popping up that has empowered this to happen. So it's pretty exciting to see, but we're like very much at the beginning, which is also very interesting.
We're really interested in, because obviously there's loads of different influencer type models, I suppose. And in B2B, it's kind of an interesting mix of people who are like kind of out there doing it on their own and then kind of like are affiliates of different companies, or they work in-house. And the in-house thing is really fascinating. Ruta and I were having this big conversation about it yesterday because we're talking about like our podcast and, what that would mean if we ever worked in-house again and all those kind of things. If you're trying to hire someone with the intention of them influencing you, so where you have worked in-house, and obviously, Will, you've had a bit of experience about this, so you can share with us as much as you like or don't want to. What are some of the risks? I'll give you all,
don't worry.
You give us all the juice, good. What are some of the risks of like hiring someone to influence for you, both as the influencer and the business? Because especially, presumably, if you've already built up your following and you're an influencer already, and then you're hired to work in-house, there's got to be some stuff that kind of comes with that. So we're really interested in what that's like on both sides, because you've both had experience of that.
Tyler, do you regret hiring me? That's the
every day.
Let's cut straight into it, all right? I mean, Tyler, you didn't really, when you hired me, I was barely an influencer, to be fair. I would say I had my making while working for you. It was almost like you hired me as a content creator and I became an influencer because of the content you allowed me to make as a job.
Yeah. Well, I'll give you some like very specific examples from this what's going to be an awkward conversation of me having hired Will to build up as an internal influencer, and then him leaving me high and dry to go work somewhere else. So let me tell you about some of the risks that I sort of see in hindsight and some of the things I think about as I go forward. Certainly number one, and this is something that I hear all the time, is that as you encourage internal employees to build up their personal brand and become more of online influencers, or you hire them in, the risk associated with them leaving the company becomes greater because they do have such a public face. They have folks that you're now encouraging to follow them in their personal channels, likely in addition to your business channels. And when they leave the company, it becomes a much more public situation. And the risk to the audience, to the continued growth becomes higher. And the ability to replace that talent can be very difficult, right? And it's like both just because of, is the skill set out there and so on, but also because, and this is kind of part two of the risk, is that the personality of that individual has a great, pardon the pun, but influence over the personality of the brand that you're building. And so in this case, great example, right? When I brought Will in, part of the reason I did pick Will for the role was because at the time he really fooled me, but I loved his personality. And
you thought he was a nice guy,
and
right?
I was like, you know what? Like for what I'm trying to build here, like I want to build a brand that is like humor first, that's, sort of a little bit quirky, willing to take risks, a little bit bold at times, a little self-deprecating. I'm like, all those things are what I wanted to build into the business brand. And so I felt like his personal brand was an amazing way to do that. And he was incredibly successful in building that. But then, of course, as he made the move to his next part of his career, trying to then continue that on with the business brand is very difficult. Again, if you're trying to find the right person with the right skills and that have that same kind of a personality, it's very, very difficult. When you're just building a corporate brand, it's a little bit easier, right? Because a lot of that is masked. It's not as in your face. And, having people sort of align to brand guidelines is a lot easier. So those are a couple of the things, the risk of, again, departure, but also the risk of, again, knowing ahead of time that these people who are out there building their influence, their personal brands and the way that their personalities work are going to get associated with your corporate brand. It's very hard to pull those two apart. And so, again, a lot of CEOs have that concern. Oh my gosh, if we bring this person in and they're representing our brand, like, what does that mean, right? Like, what if they get canceled? What if they say something we don't like? And those are always risks with influencers because they're bringing those personalities and you want to unleash it. So it's a tricky thing. It's very hard.
And obviously it's especially a large risk if they're employed by you, right? So like if it's just an influencer you're collaborating with and then they say something stupid later, it's like, well, whatever, they don't work with us. But if they're your employee, it's different. Is there anything that Will ever posted whilst at SalesFeed that you were like, ooh, we're gonna have to talk about that?
Oh yeah, absolutely. But there were also well, there were a lot.
I remember getting slapped on the wrist one time.
Yeah, Will, what do you recall as probably your most risque content that you posted under the SalesFeed brand?
It's probably even more risque now, but I used a trending TikTok sound from Rick and Morty, which at the time the guy who made that hadn't yet been accused of all the heinous, horrible stuff he's done. But in that, he's like saying "S my D," and I was gesturing while doing the sound. And Tyler was like, we mentioned there's a line. That was it.
That
was the line. Don't point and mouth that anymore, please, using the corporate brand.
Listen, if you don't push, you're not going to know, are you?
Like, it was discovery.
Ask for forgiveness, not permission.
That's it.
There was some of that, but thankfully, Will was also the kind of person, and we built a culture. And this is actually a really interesting sort of extension to this conversation, because what I ended up figuring out that was so important was for that, that internal trust, that transparency, that collaboration within the team, where, Will always felt super comfortable coming to myself and the few other folks who were really part of the core SalesFeed team, and posting and saying, I want to drop this in like 3 hours. I feel a little like, I'm not sure. What do you all think? Right. And, if we would never come back and say, throw it out. That's garbage. It was always the like, yeah, I get it. But like this one thing, maybe consider saying that in a slightly different way. Right. And so that was really great. And there were a lot of those moments, right? Rightfully so, where it was the like, what do you all think? Is this off brand? Is this a bit too far? And having that kind of collaboration is really important. And not all companies end up having that with the influencers that they work with, or even if they're in-house, right? Sometimes they feel like they're a really kind of solo island and they're just like, you go do your thing. And I think that's a mistake that they can make. I think it's really, really important for those influencers, particularly the in-house ones, but even the external ones, to like kind of be a part of the team culture as much as possible, and have it be as, even though you have to enable them to do their own thing and really unleash their personalities, to create that right level of internal collaboration, transparency within the team. And that is I think really important, but also, again, difficult to do if you don't have the right either leader or culture running it.
The answer to the question, if you have to ask the team if it's okay, then it's probably not okay. Trust your gut on that one.
I was going to ask. So we heard about the business risks, but Will, what about the risks to you? Because you align yourself to a brand, you might only align yourself to one. There's danger in that. What about your income? What about your credibility? All of those sorts of things. Because I can imagine there's probably a level of like selfishness that is rightly so that goes along with being an influencer, because it's your brand as well.
Yeah. I think the biggest risk for me, and I've done a myriad of sponsorships now, and I've done them well, I've done them poorly, I've had bad feelings afterwards, and felt like ones that were really good collaborations. I've worked for 2 companies full time as a content creator, that's the name for it, but really influencing people for the brand as well. I think the biggest risk as an influencer is if you work with everyone, then you kind of work with no one. You kind of end up being a sellout, I would say, and that's something that I think about a lot. I don't really want to be viewed as someone who will just work with any company and say that this thing is great because I'm being given money for it. I think that's where a lot of people make the mistake with influencer marketing, especially when they're working with agencies. I've noticed they just go find someone with lots of followers, lots of engagement, and say, how much is your rate? And then they go ahead and make one post for them. But there's no conviction there. There's no real desire to make long-term gain for both companies. And there's no belief in the tools. They kind of just say, they're just flogging something they don't believe in. So the idea of being a sellout is definitely something that plays in my mind whenever I'm talking to a brand about working with them. And the way I've got around that, and I'm going to have some announcements coming soon, but I want to work with companies from now on. I don't want to work with companies just because they reach out to me and say, hey, we want to pay you this money, even if it's a lot of money. It's more about finding companies that I do already believe in the value of, or can come around seeing the value of if there's something new that I haven't used before. If I know that I would have already paid to use their tool, their service, then that's a good indicator that that's a company I believe in and would work with in a more sponsorship or long term capacity. I think that's also it. Is it a long term, or is it just a one off? Like a one off isn't going to really do that much for the company realistically. It might just flop, but also that's where you start to feel that kind of sellout. Someone who's doing a different brand deal every single week just isn't really.
And also, if it's a one-off for you, Will, it means that you're basically asking a lot from your audience all the time, because if it's a one-off, there has to be a call to action, there has to be some sort of offer, so you're just putting out content that's basically selling shit instead of putting out the content that people were there for originally, right?
And you water down the stuff that you do actually want. You can only promote so many things before you really hurt promoting the thing that you care about, right? So a lot of people like these days want me to promote their course. I'm like, if I promote yours, then I'm not going to be talking about the one that I actually made and actually think is a lot better. You know what I mean? Like, but that's kind of where I think I've also seen on the brand side, because I've worked with influencers at other companies, most recently at Lavender. If you hire a lot of full-time influencers and all those folks suddenly leave, then that can be brand damage as well. Tyler, you spoke about like, what if that influencer goes ahead and does something bad or gets cancelled? The same thing can happen to companies. Companies can get bad reputations, and therefore, as a full-time person, you don't want to be affiliated with that company. Not to say that something happened, but that can happen, right? Especially these days, people don't really like corporations that much. With all the layoffs and corporate greed. There you go. So yeah.
And Will, not to put you on the spot, but obviously you're still going to be doing sponsorships, and you're still going to be doing your great content, but you've gone out on your own and you've got your incredible merch now, which is, by the way, fucking hilarious. I love it. But you're kind of not in a sales role anymore. How are you going to stay relevant to your sales community? Or are you about to tell us you're about to take on a big VP of sales role?
No, I'm not making for the full-time employee gig anymore. I'm too hard to manage. Tyler will tell you, and I don't like being managed either. So, no, that's a really good question, Ruta. And I think there's a lot of parallels between running a business and being in a sales role. That's one, but obviously that doesn't translate directly. One thing I'm working on right now is I want to start doing a regular show where I make cold calls live and I craft cold emails live and actually do the job live and make that content. It was something that I really wanted to do at Lavender before I left. I was like, hey, we could just make me an SDR and just film it. It would just be content for days. All the ups, all the downs, the cold calls, the hang-ups, the objection handling, the writing the emails, the personalizing. It's like teaching people by doing it. So I think there is a lot of power in showing, not just telling. And I think that's where a lot of influencers do become slightly disconnected and jaded because they haven't done the role for so long, especially trainers. Like there are folks who haven't sold a product other than themselves since like 2010. And a lot, regardless of what people say, a lot has obviously changed since 2010 in the world of selling software, services, anything really.
I love the idea, by the way, of like live selling and like showing people what it's like and doing all of that. Love that. I had a similar idea, and I think I pitched it to Emma, of us doing like marketing software showdowns where we either get a trial or we actually get people from the software company and we just give them a task and we see how quickly they can achieve like that marketing activity using their own software and doing it live. Obviously, no one's going to want to do it because like you're gonna have to be brave, but maybe me and Emma can do it instead. So we get or maybe we do secret shopping with like a demo and then go through like the process of what it's like to buy from them and then post it. Again, I think we'll have to,
you might lose some friends with that one, but
we're gonna lose friends / be not allowed to have any demos anywhere, but it could be fun.
Get blacklisted. That's why you have to create an alias. And the good thing is these days AI can generate your headshots, photos, you can make pun names. For example, I have a fake LinkedIn profile called Chasing Cash, and he's like a sales bro. He's only got one follower so far, but I'm thinking about how I'm going to use that one.
Or we can get a lovely VM from somewhere in the world that we can make her a profile and she can book us calls, and then we show up.
Actually, Ruta, one of the things that we did at SalesFeed, and I think this is actually a interesting way for Will at the time to stay current with a lot of things happening in sales. And it's tied to what you were just thinking about is we created a series called Sales Tech Talks. And it was basically an ongoing walkthrough and review series of different sales technologies. And so typically it was once a month. Sometimes it was twice a month. What Will, as our influencer at the time, would do is he'd actually sign up for a new sales tool. He would spend countless hours. Actually, though, he would record a screen, he would record his reaction shots, and we basically do like a review / walkthrough for these different products. And we found, like, first of all, our audience loved it. Like, they were these 5 to 10 minute walkthroughs where you could see for yourself before you signed up for a tool, like, does it really do what it says it does? How effective is it? These sorts of things. So it was super valuable for the audience. It was super valuable, I think, for Will, because he got to learn all these new tools and sort of see what's happening out in the market space. And it was great for the brand because we got a ton of YouTube traffic. Like the seamless.ai one, I think, has over 10,000 views on our YouTube channel. And, some of the other ones, because we titled them as like reviews of these, and people are always searching for reviews or walkthroughs. And so it was this kind of great trifecta. And it was kind of a good example of like activating influencer marketing in a unique way that was like super beneficial across the board. So, there's an idea for you. Instead of like hardcore mystery shopping and like trashing brands, you could do a nice polite, like, MarTech, tech talks where you like try them out. But of course, every once in a while you can be like, yeah, no, this thing doesn't stick. This just doesn't work.
I'm sold, Emma. We're doing these.
It's all good until it really doesn't do what it's supposed to do. And then we're like, oh, fuck,
Yeah.
Well, we didn't say it would do it that way. We just, yeah.
We tried to keep them positive, but there was definitely, in the end, I was giving them a rating out of 5, and then we switched it so I'd do pros and cons, because like giving someone a 1 star is basically just like, if they've got 500 employees, like punching every single one of them in the face and saying you suck. So I ended up having to like draw out some pros on some of them that weren't there, but like I was like, oh, I like the UI. The UI is crispy, clean.
It's got a great personality,
It's got their marketing content's really good. The product sucks, but I would also say like there's although the influencer side of things, like for the company, both Lavender and when I was working for you at SalesFeed, Tyler, like I was there promoting them, and that was the influence part. But I was also creating content that the brands continue to own and continue to perform well today. Like I look at like that there's like a weird crossover between an influencer and a content creator, and I think it depends on how far someone goes into it. Like some people, influencers, like just post like tweet screenshots on LinkedIn. Other people will like do full video productions, and I think there's a really interesting thing there of like, if I work with brands now, and the way I've been discussing it with a couple of brands for long-term kind of engagements, is that it's not just going to be like 3 months of me promoting your thing. It's like you want to walk away with some really helpful content that you wouldn't have been able to make, that's going to have some of my personality in there, that's going to have some long-lasting value that you'll own forever, So that's a side effect of it as well. But that's why I think there's different degrees of, there's like a creator and an influencer. I think they're almost two things at the same time as well. Basically, I was a content marketer who happened to build a following while working with you, Tyler, as well.
Yeah, this is such a key point that I think, again, a lot of folks miss when you are partnering more than just a like, hey, let's do a couple things and move on. If you're either partnering longer term with an influencer or you have an in-house influencer, looking for cross leverage in other parts of the business is a huge part of it. So for an in-house influencer, to Will's point, there's like so many ways that person can support other parts of the business in very material ways. So again, it could be content creation. Either the content they're creating is leveraged by other parts of the team, right? Like our demand gen teams at Vidyard, they were always like, what's the next video Will is doing? Because we want to promote it into our audience over here because we think it's better than what our core content team is creating. Shoot, did I say that out loud? Sorry, Aaron. But so that's like one part of it. And then there's other parts where, like, a great example is we partnered with an external influencer, Kevin Dorsey, KD. Love KD to death, the best. And we do, an annual partnership with him. And so he does a lot of great content with us. He speaks at our events, he shares stuff with his audience, but he also partners with our sales team. And so he'll actually introduce and make referrals to our sales team. And on the flip side, if our sales team needs to bring him into an account to actually be a third party to like teach them a little bit about video selling strategy in that case, he was open to those engagements as well. So he became this sort of great extension to the sales team and was more than just this like standalone influencer where we're trying to reach his audience. So that's something else that you can think about, is where can these either external or internal influencers have a bigger impact if they're not just working in a silo, if they're actually integrated into the business.
So on that, and we're talking about the line between influencers and content creators, if you've all of a sudden got content like people like yourself, Will, who all of a sudden find themselves as part of a marketing team, but you're actually directly driving sales. We also had a really nice chat with Tom Boston, and he was saying that's how he basically built up his pipeline, is that he was an outbound sales guy, starts creating his hilarious videos. All of a sudden he's got his whole pipeline sussed. And for him, that's fine because he's a salesperson creating content. But if you're a marketer creating content and then you're all of a sudden selling, should those people be getting paid commission? How does that all work? Because most of the time marketers don't get that kind of kickback.
Because also influencers can make a buttload of money, right, on their own. So like, how do you incentivize them to stay?
So as somebody who's like sort of managed that, the way that I would think about it is, number one, no, they should not be actually working and closing deals. Otherwise, again, they're just going to get sucked into the world of being a sales rep, and that's not what you're hiring them for. And so if they're not working and closing deals, no, forget about trying to get commission on those sorts of things. It's just a non-starter for me. But what you need to do is you need to like be intentional in like creating and recognizing that value that they are delivering, and like building that into the role and effectively their comp plan, right? So again, if they're just doing like content every day, you're probably going to pay them similar to a really good content marketer. If they're somebody who is actually now actively doing these other things, maybe they are partnering with the sales team, they're going out on sales calls, they're going to conferences and doing these things. And if you say, geesh, if we lost this person, we're losing this, and we're losing, this amount of potential pipeline that they're generating and bringing in, we should be paying them a premium. Like they should be earning like the right amount associated with the role, the contribution, and so on. And so I think you need to be very intentional in that. And if they are bringing in opportunities based on their personal brand, because they're sourcing things, they're passing it over to the sales team, again, they shouldn't be getting commission on that, but that should be understood and recognized. And when their comp, review comes around the next year, they should be thinking about that, as should you, as, sort of leverage, right? Like it's because it's a reality. They're like, look, last year I've been tracking it and I passed 15 opportunities over to the sales team based on people who came in through my personal brand. I just want to make sure that we understand the value here. And as my role grows and continues, that's recognized and understood. And again, as a business, you need to be smart about that. You need to be proactive about it and be looking at ways in which, again, if you want them to have a bigger impact on the business, you also have to be willing to invest in it.
Because I can see that being one of the major risks, right? Because you've got this successful influencer who's helping you out, who's maybe they're in-house, they've passed over, however many deals it is, that's worth a certain amount of money. And all of a sudden that influencer or that content creator is going, hang on a second, I've bought in maybe even millions and you're paying me what you pay a content marketer. That's not, that's not right. That's got to be tricky, right? And I imagine that does come up quite a bit.
Yeah, no, it's something you have to be thoughtful about, absolutely, on both sides. And recognizing and understanding the value of folks in these influencer and evangelist roles is tricky today. It's not something we've traditionally done, at least in B2B. And so I think that is going to evolve as kind of both sides get smarter to this and understanding, like, A, what is the value they're bringing? B, like, where could they contribute more value? And then C, how do we like build roles around this? How do we recognize it? How do we compensate it? We're in our very early days of like figuring that out. And again, internally, when I hired Will, our, people HR team, they're like, okay, so how do you categorize? We're trying to do our standardization of our roles and our budget salaries and so on. And they're like, what is this role? And I'm like, well, it's a bit of this, it's a bit of this, it's a bit of that, a bit of this. And they're like, we have no idea how to level it. And I'm like, neither do I. But I'll tell you in a year from now when I see what the output is. And so we're at a point where these roles aren't sort of standardized, at least in the B2B world. But I think that's going to change over the next few years. It'll take a few years for it to really get ingrained, but I think it'll start to happen.
I do think there's there's an argument for the inverse as well, right? Like some of these roles are probably lost at centers as well, right? Like there's different categories of this. Like not everyone with not every influencer sponsorship is going to be fruitful. Not every full-time influencer creator is going to be a net positive for the business as well. But you got to. I think that's why you got to plan it out accordingly and really think about what success looks like beforehand. But also not just in the stuff you can measure as well. I know it's like brand is like such a like thing. It's over here. I don't know, but like obviously we know that in B2B especially, it's a longer game than just the same as B2C, where someone like you were saying earlier, Ruta, like James Charles says, "Hey, I love Fenty foundation," and then they can track the link and see that 1,000 people went and bought Fenty foundation. It just doesn't work the same in the world of software services solutions. So there's something to be said there, and I think there's a lot of room to be more intentional about how you capitalize on these as well. So like people think like, oh, it's marketing, but I've seen the most success I saw, and something that Tyler and I were originally talking about a lot when I was working with you at Vidyard, Tyler, was like, okay, so we have this huge brand, we get the engagement. What does likes and comments really mean for the company? Oh, people know who this company is. It's like a household name. Does that help? I mean, some people are going to come inbound off the back of that. Some people are going to go to the website, click and request a demo, and be like, love your content, want to know what your product does. There's also the space to say there should be more of like, and we all love this word in sales and marketing, alignment, to actually then capitalize on that brand, measure it, and get those folks who are now aware of the brand into the pipeline. And I think that's where a lot of companies miss out and don't have a process as well. They're just like doing brand and they're doing sales. But those two things can come together, and there's a ton of low-hanging fruit. For example, when I was managing the Lavender page, I used a tool called Common Room, not a sponsor. But it allowed me to literally, it allowed me to essentially rank the people who were engaging with our LinkedIn page by how engaged with our brand they were. And in that, I could then integrate that with Salesforce and see who were a customer. So those are people we could tap for referrals, people who we hadn't ever engaged with before. So very quickly, we looked at just people who meet our ICP, the title, the company sizes. We could start hammering that list with outbound, essentially. And those people were like, whoa, yeah, I know Lavender. And we're like, we know. We weren't reaching out to them saying, like, we saw you love our content. It's more like, hey, here's some great targeting messaging anyway. We just know those people are going to be so much more receptive. I think that can also happen with external influencers as well. Like, if I go ahead and, let's say, get KD to speak about Vidyard and he gets 300 likes about this great tip on how to use video, well, those 300 people in there are now like ripe for the picking for an outbound sales rep to come and try and see those people as some form of intent lead, essentially. So there's definitely some space for more measurable techniques to make the most of these strategies as well, rather than just clicks and signups.
One, I would love to know what the numbers look like in terms of those potential bonuses we're speaking of versus like base salary. I know this, again, unstructured space, but just to have some sort of idea, if someone's looking at doing this, like what does that look like
for like a full-time creator?
For a full-time creator that's bringing in revenue, and they are because people are referencing what they're doing.
Oh, that's such a wild.
Let's say in a boring B2B SaaS business
as well, right? So like in the UK, it's going to be different. It's going to in Canada and the US, it's going to be different. I have been offered for a single post as an external influencer anywhere from $100, to which I of course said no. It's just not worth my time to even write the post in that case. And I want to make a whole video, and it's going to be funny and great and awesome on its own. All the way up to 5,000 for one post on LinkedIn and TikTok. That one was. So that can give you an idea of range of like external.
Yeah, I think what I'm finding is this like influencer role. Again, it can be so different depending on the company, depending on the level of person you're trying to get, and how important you think it is for the business, and that differs depending on the market you're in. Like, there's so many factors that are a part of that. So I think it is a really ill-defined space. I would expect you would see both models. I think the primary today, at least in B2B, would be a predictable salary-based type of a role. Again, because most outside of sales, most other roles, including marketing, tend to be salary-based with potential bonus structure. That's just company bonus structure based on deliverable against your targets. So I would expect it to typically align with that. There may be some exceptions, and especially when you're bringing in somebody who, again, has an existing audience and is therefore, either commanding a greater amount. Like, for example, if I were to go out and say, okay, like Kevin Dorsey, you've been a great external influencer for us. I'd love to bring you in-house now to be a part of our team and to like really blow the doors off this thing, because we believe in this so much. And we think that like we could really, have a massive impact. I would expect somebody like him to then say, okay, you have to either my opportunity cost is very significant. So either, my salary is going to be way more than you're likely going to offer, or I'll take a core salary, but with a high bonus structure based on performance, because I'm so confident in what I can deliver that I believe I can do that. That, again, as a marketing leader, gives me that kind of good confidence level of, okay, we're paying for performance. So I think you'll see those, but I think they'll be the exception based on folks who are coming in with a big audience and you have a greater sort of expectation or a clear expectation of what they're going to deliver. That's how I would see it today.
Yeah. I think it also goes back to the fact that, like, whatever you do in marketing, you want to know what the performance is going to be, right? So it's all well and good, like you said, I don't know, hiring someone or working with someone who's got a huge following. That doesn't necessarily mean the performance of what they do is any good. And we've seen that, haven't we, Ruta? Like, if you think about some of the HR influencers that we've worked with over the years, because we've worked with quite a lot of HR tech peeps, some of them have been great and have been worth every penny. And some of them, I mean...
we can't get into it.
I think there's also like a how good is that person actually marketing? Like, a lot of these folks, if you're in the HR space, right, I'd expect a HR influencer to have worked in HR at some point or be a HR consultant as well, right? So like, do they have expertise, or are they just like, that's a big question that I often ask as well. Like, do they, if I was brought on just to make memes for someone, there'd be a question of how much value that would drive on its own, right? It's hard because there's a scale of folks there as well. I think that's why it helps to have conviction in the product as well, because then you can easily weave in complementary pitches or adjacent to the core product you're trying to actually move as well. Not so much like a hard buy this thing, but like, if I'm talking about video selling techniques, then it's a clear tie into the value of Vidyard.
Exactly. Yeah. It's that whole thing. It's like and also it's that trade-off between, do you just want the name and the face attached to your brand, so therefore you can say that you worked with whoever it was, or do you actually want this to drive performance, to drive revenue, to increase awareness? Have you actually got the purpose of the piece of content or whatever it is you're trying to do? Is that nailed down? Because I think that's where people go wrong, right? Having done a conference recently with a very, very high profile person that I quite frankly was not worth the price tag. I would say you need to think about where you put your money. We probably could have had a load of better qualified people with better expertise answering questions that are to do with people's real jobs and challenges, rather than just a big name that everyone was like very excited to come and see.
Although in a way it made sense, kind of.
It
for the audience, kind of.
It did make sense, and they wanted that person there. The audience asked for that person, so we stumped up the cash for the person. But in hindsight, I think that in terms of like relevancy to their day-to-day jobs, I think we probably could have found someone better.
So, but like, one of the really important things when you think about how you work, especially with the external influencers, is we often approach it with what is the outputs that we're looking for. So we want you to do 3 posts, or we want you to create this piece of content, or show up at this event, or promote our stuff in this one edition of your newsletter. And sometimes that's all you're going to get because they won't commit beyond that. But always be mindful going into it. What are the outcomes you're hoping to drive from it? And first of all, that should drive the outputs, of course. But when and where possible, if you can structure those partnerships in a way that is tied to the outcomes, it's always going to be better and more beneficial for you. it's tough. Not all influencers will do that, right? Sometimes they'll just say, look, I have no idea how it's going to perform. That's the world we're in. So I will commit to doing 3 posts. But I think as long as you go into it saying, okay, our expectation, right? Our goal for this, the outcome we're looking for is to get at least 1,000 people to click on this link, right? To come over here to this page. And can we agree either on paper or just verbally that if we're not even in that ballpark, that you'll, continue to do a couple more things to help us get closer to that target? And they might come back and say, no, because I don't think I'm going to get 1,000 people to click on it. And then you're like, okay, maybe I need to adjust our expectations. Or maybe they'll say, and my experience has typically the ones that you're partnering with will say, yeah, absolutely. Like, of course, I'm here to help you. Now that I know what your desired outcome is, maybe they'll actually come back and say, actually, if that's your desired outcome, I might recommend I do this instead. Right. And so as much as you can go into it with that understanding and be upfront with that what we're trying to achieve on the other side of this is X. And then let's partner to figure out the best way to get there and either commit on paper or verbally that that's what we're driving towards as an outcome. And if we're way off base after this, let's make sure that we work together to, right size it if possible. And, in that case, at the booth, you could have said, we're looking for somebody who doesn't suck at the booth. Can you deliver?
I need someone who doesn't speak in riddles, please.
Let's start there.
That's just what we ended up with.
Like, I've had a lot of people approach me on things that they've had a really clear idea about what they wanted me to create, but the idea of that isn't like, oh, we'll make us a video about this. It's like, what do you think I know my audience better than anyone's. It's like what they know, I know what people expect to see from me. And that whole thing that I mentioned at the very beginning here, the danger of that feeling of selling out, that will happen if I take directions or a script from someone. Like, for example, I had a well-known company reach out to me and say, hey, Will, we want you to do 2 videos for us. And it was a good amount of money. I just had a kid, so I said yes. And this was the last one I actually did externally. And it was basically, I said, here's my idea. Here's what I know will work. It will go viral if we do this. And I said, and tell you, this was actually your idea, but I stole it and pretend it was mine. I was still working at the time. I said, I'm going to write, I love brand. Honk if you love brand on my back. And I live right next to a highway. You can't hear it because I've got my back basement soundproof. I will go out and stand by that highway, and I'll just get a ton of clips of people just honking their horns. Doesn't matter what written. If you say honk on your back, people are going to honk, and I'll just cull that all together into like a compilation of that. That will get 1,000 likes on LinkedIn because it's just something most people aren't willing to do. It's like the tramp stamp I have on my lower back. And they said no, that's not on brand for us. And instead, I ended up doing basically a demo for them and posting that instead. And believe it or not, didn't do well. I could have told them that because that's just not why people follow me, to see a demo of some random software. So it's also like, I think the influencers need to push back as well and say, hey, if you want that, it's not going to happen if we do this. So just setting expectations is good.
That also diminishes people's integrity, though, right? Because when you see someone doing a product demo and they've been paid to do it, like even if you're just like, oh, it's just such a turn off.
Good for you, Will. Go get your money, but also like, do you actually like this? Like, we don't
just
know.
stand by the highway and get honked at. We'd all definitely rather see that.
Watch that, yeah.
Yeah. I'm still tempted to go do it. I'm going to go write I love the Blame It on Marketing podcast on my back right now.
Please don't invoice us later.
We can't afford it. We can't afford to pay you. So please don't.
We can start up a GoFundMe page for this, folks. Like, let's do it, Emma, Ruta. Yeah. We'll get contributions.
Yeah. I like the people who, the people who made Cards Against Humanity, who just went and dug a hole. They got people to dig a hole, and they sold. I can't remember how many more games they sold as a result of just getting people to dig a pointless hole, but it worked. It's like, that's what we want. We don't want product demos.
We've got one more question for you guys before we let you go, because we've been having too much fun for too long now, obviously. It's a question that we ask everyone that we talk to social selling about, and it's, lots of companies want to do this, lots of companies can't afford to do this, and lots of companies are trying to get their people that are internally there already to do it, but they're not having usually any success really, or there's one person that's kind of doing okay. What are some of the ways that you would say are actually successful at incentivizing people to do this? Because I know, at least for myself, if I'm a salesperson and you want me to make content that's fine, but that's really not my job, and it's actually not in any of my job descriptions or in my like pay package or any of those things to do that. So how do you flip that and make that work if you've already got a bunch of people internally that you could be leveraging?
I've been asked this question before. Tyler, we were at an event in Toronto recently, and someone was like, "Hey, we work in the L&D space. How do we get our salespeople all to be HR influencers?" I was like, "They're not going to be. Come on, like you haven't got 20 Josh Bursons in your account executive team. Let's be real. There's probably one person who may have worked in HR before who loves HR to their core and can deliver and be a thought leader with conviction. Double down on that person. Make that person like trying to get a bunch of sellers or like team members to suddenly be influencers when they've got existing jobs to do. It's not realistic, and I don't think it will work as well as people think it will. Find people who actually do have the passion about the topic you want to speak about, and double down on them and enable them to go out there and do it, and give them tools. Like, heck, if you've got someone who's on your team willing to go out there on LinkedIn, Twitter, TikTok, whatever it is, and speak about the topic that's valuable to your audience or is funny to your audience, entertaining to your audience, go buy them a camera, go get them a ring light, go enable them to do more of that. And then the other 19 people who just want to close deals, just leave them to it, because that's realistically, it's only going to be a distraction to them. That's my take on it. Tyler, I know you might have something different.
Yeah, no, I wholeheartedly agree with the fact that you should not approach it with like, hey, everybody in our company should be an influencer, or everybody on our sales team should try to be an influencer. I think that you should be intentional in identifying folks who have the opportunity to be a great voice in their communities, and folks who also, again, have an affinity and a desire to do it. And to Will's point, I think putting focus and developing those individuals. But then again, as an extension of what Will said, I think the key is you have to create an enablement strategy for it, right? So if you just go and say, like, again, incentive is not the right way to do it. It's not going to be like, hey, if you do X number of posts per week, we're going to give you a bonus, or you're going to get a pizza party at the end of the quarter. And if not, you're not going to be invited to the pizza party. Sorry. The incentive is, if you do this well and you want to do it, you have to believe in the fact that it's going to help you do your job, and it's going to contribute more back to the business, and it's going to build your personal brand. Are you interested in any of those things? If yes, okay, we're here to help. And that's now where, but if you just let them, and it's like, hey, go build your social following, it's not going to work. And again, a lot of people miss that. And so like putting in an intentional program in place to like help these people, to give them some training, some guidance. Maybe you create a little like internal SWAT team or group where it's like, okay, we're the like 5 people who are going to be doing this. Let's like share ideas. Let's brainstorm together. Let's start putting stuff out there, learn as we go. This person over here is a great video editor, so we're going to like free up some of their time to help you folks out. Like, you have to enable it as a program if you want to get serious about it, as opposed to, again, just like saying, okay, everybody on the sales team do 3 more posts per week. It's not going to work, and I would not suggest. It's not even worth the pizza.
I like that. No one has said that, and in many ways, I do think that's true. If someone's not content inclined, they will not create content. There's lots of marketers that aren't content inclined, and they won't create content, and you think we'd all be up for it, but that's not true. Let alone if you're in sales or in HR or like any of the serious job descriptions.
The serious job description.
The ones that aren't trying to talk about their shit all the time.
Now we know why this podcast is called Blame on Marketing.
Because we don't know anything about marketing.
We're not serious about what we're doing up here.
But the fun department, we have a whole episode about that.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Will and Tyler, for joining us. Tyler, will definitely have you back. Season 7, maybe. Will... Yeah. If you would like Will to stand by the highway, you can hire him. He's up for it.
Go to the GoFundMe link in the bio, in the description of this podcast episode. If we hit our crowdsourcing funding goal of 5,000, we'll be out there repping this podcast on the highway.
And folks, if you're listening to this while driving right now, honk if you love the Blame It On Marketing podcast. Honk, honk, honk.